Okay.
And we're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to I think it's the fourth iteration of the Foam community call. Today, we're going to talk through the Foam map specifically and some new features. We have Caleb joining us to talk about the leaderboard, which is going to get released next week. Brian is going to talk about some of the learnings and some of the things we've seen on the Foam map since we released the heat map release last week. And I'm going to talk about some of the thinking and some of the learnings we've done from launching 2 and now with the leaderboard 3 gamification incentive tests or kind of releases, and what we're going to do on that moving forward. But first, and this is something we did last week as well, and we kind of liked how that structured the call, we're going to answer some questions from the community and then jump into the presentations. So there have been some questions already sent in previously. Ryan is also here to answer some of the questions. The first question, and this is an easy one and is almost like a layup, but it's good, is I'm keen to figure out how to use my Foam tokens to stake a location on the map. I'm also keen to understand how notification works so I can manage my stakes. So what you want to do is you want to go to our map guide, mapguide.foam.space. And there should be a guide directly for how to do both of these things. The email notifications just get released, and you can sign up directly by the mail, via the platform, via the Foam app, and it will notify you of updates on your POIs, and a guide for placing your POIs available directly on the map guide. If you have any issues with this, you can write a mail to support@foam.space, or join our discourse at discourse.foam.space and ask specific questions about any unclarities. So that's an easy one. If you have more questions also, please ask away in the side of this YouTube video, and we will get to them after we have gone through the initial questions. And also, please ask questions during the call, and we will make sure to answer them during the call or at the end. So yeah, this is supposed to be an interactive format, so let's use that to the best of our capabilities. Okay, then next is a question regarding geofencing. At what point will I be able to utilize geofencing? Does someone else in the comp at Foam want to take that question?
Interesting. So geofencing is an extremely interesting concept, and definitely one that can be utilized with dynamic proof of location. So for example, you wanted a certain fleet of vehicles not to be able to leave a certain area, or you want to have voting where people have to be within a certain boundary to participate. But that said, because we already have the cryptospatial coordinate registry and spatial index architecture, as well as the Foam map TCR, you can still implement geofence kind of logic into an application today. So that could be a game or something else that plugs into the Foam map. And using the kind of geo-encoding standards that we have, you can basically today already design applications with geologic, so that include geofencing. So that's something that can be done based off the Foam mapping tool, but in the dynamic proof of location would be much more robustly implemented.
Okay, the next question is around state channels. Are there any implementations of state channels on the Foam map? I think also Ryan is a good person to answer that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anyone using state channels building on the Foam map. However, that said, we ourselves are using state channels in our research for dynamic proof of location, specifically talking with the team at L4 and the counterfactual verification systems that they have utilized. We're excited about the playground that they're launching, and that is what the tests are entailing that we're running on the GeoPickles. So we are using state channels for dynamic proof of location, but like we said, any application can now be built or designed on the foam map, and those applications themselves could open a state channel with a specific point. So those tools are definitely available for people to use. We're not aware of any specific team using state channels for the foam map, but if anyone has any ideas or would like to speak to us about it, please reach out.
Okay.
I see that the next question is that foam tokens in dynamic proof of location will be available for mining. And the question is, how is that going to actually be distributed? And will that require gas? So the first starting point where you can learn more information about that is potentially a recent blog post we published called The Anatomy of a Zone. And that post goes over what is a zone, what is a zone anchor, how do zones form. And that post also touches on how is a zone rewarded. And so this is a working title, but we have an actor in the protocol called the TFAR contract, and that stands for the Total Foam Area Reward. And that's going to be what, once you're verified that you're running a zone properly, this is going to be the contract that determines your rewards. And that contract's going to look at things like how old your zone is, how much area it's covering, how many pairwise connections it has with other zone anchors, and what the total stake is of its tokens. Further, it would evaluate how many signals it is operating nearby. So in this sense, the mining rewards will be determined by the TFAR contract on a case-by-case basis or round-by-round basis. And the rewards would change based on how much they've staked or how many signals are operating nearby. These parameters won't be able to be hard-coded, even though they'll be dynamic, they'll be hard-coded mining contract. And we can't really finalize that until there is mass testing. And that is what we're going to be looking to our community for when we can release the specifications for radios and begin testing in different test networks, connecting that to the software of the blockchain stack that includes state channels or Tendermint consensus. And once we can actually run test nets at different locations, that's reward hard coding can begin, or how to actually finalize what those reward schedules would look like.
Thank you for that explanation, Ryan. There's another question which I'm not sure I understand, which is, how does Foam integrate with LEO deployments? I don't know what that means.
So LEO is a low Earth orbit satellite. It's kind of a new, I know Tesla or SpaceX is launching one of those as well. It's totally possible that one of those devices could operate as a zone anchor and broadcast out to a system. The TimeSync protocol itself is radio agnostic, so it's possible that you would have certain actors that are in space. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not what we're pushing for right now, but it's definitely something that if we see larger scale LEO deployments, that they could be interacting with the protocol for sure.
Okay, then next, this is a question that is reoccurring. I think it's the same person asking it in the previous weeks as well, which is if the process is getting harder or easier. I do know that Ryan last time answered that since the ecosystem is developing so quickly, it's getting easier because of the tooling. So the available tools to us is just constantly growing, which makes the development easier. Are there any changes? Does anyone else in the team have any opinions on this? I'll take that as a no and move on. I don't know if there are questions in the chat.
In the chat, asking if signaling and dynamic proof of location could be in conflict if there's any sort of gaming mechanism. It's definitely possible to game in a way, but it's not necessarily a conflict in that you can be a signaler and then yourself also be a zone operator. So you can essentially boost your own rewards, but the signal doesn't apply only to you. So because you have that signal there, you may attract other people. And so that bonus will then be split between others. So you can always try and basically give yourself a bonus for actually operating the protocol. And so even if you get a higher weighted reward, you're still doing the work and doing the service and not committing fraud. And so because you're the first one there and you had enough other tokens to signal, you can reap those rewards. But you are actually setting up the network, so it benefits all the other participants as well. And it's almost designed that way that, the more you signal and the more you set up, the more rewards you can get. Or if there's a new area with new signals, and you're the first one there, you're going to do the best. So it's almost like that game and interplay is meant to kind of incentivize chasing the rewards, but we'll definitely see how it plays out even through different test networks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions from the community? Otherwise, we're going to jump directly into the main chunk of the...
I think that's it for now in terms of the YouTube chat, but we can return to them at the end if needed.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the chat, we're going to talk specifically about new releases on the foam map, some new learnings from the heat map tool, and also are going to talk about the gamification tests and the learnings from that we've been doing so far. But first, Brian is going to talk about some of the learnings from the heat map tool and where people and how people are putting their signals up. So Brian, I'll give it over to you.
Thanks, Arthur. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about is our heat map feature, and I guess some of the ways that it's revealed interesting and maybe unexpected demands for dynamic proof of location. And so first, like taking a step back and just kind of reintroducing why we introduced signals in the first place. Signals are meant to, outside of any kind of like obvious assumptions around where maybe points of interest might be or any kind of like urban areas, signals are a way for us to like incentivize the community to point towards places where the demand for dynamic proof of location might be the greatest, like regardless of those other factors. And the reasoning for that is kind of like, it's like the foam map is a map that's built from the ground up, like first and foremost. Like, yes, it might be easy to assume that downtown Manhattan and downtown San Francisco might be great places to kind of like signal for dynamic proof of location or demand for that. But turns out, there could be other places that are just kind of like completely outside of a radar that our community finds really important or wants to like incentivize basically the placement of like dynamic proof of location. So when we released signals, it was a way to kind of go and do that. And back, a couple months ago when that happened, you can go to the foam map and basically see, let's see if I could zoom up here. Basically, you would see this view. So these little yellow dots, they all represent signals. And the same way as like POIs, basically, you can go and see bunchings of them, and that reveals maybe some kind of analytics or like some kind of trend about where people are placing the signals. But we really wanted to take this the next step further with this heat map feature we recently released, which is a way of basically creating a real-time data visualization that shows you what bunchings of signals look like together and basically clearly point towards areas that will be lit up in colors that say like, yeah, this is where the greatest demand for dynamic proof of location is. And so with that, I think there are a few places, and I'll show you what the completely zoomed out in the continental US view of signals looks like. So you could see like there's a few places that make sense, like right over New York City, there's a clear demand for dynamic proof of location. In San Francisco, there's also a demand. In Phoenix, that's kind of surprising. I'll get to that in a second. But if we zoom back into the Bay Area, you see like, oh, well, in San Jose, right, that makes sense. That kind of like downtown urban center, there would be a clear need for dynamic proof of location. And then you'll see in San Francisco in a second, once this renders, there's also a pretty dense, right, like claim towards the need for dynamic proof of location there. But really what I wanted to talk about is kind of this stretch in between downtown San Francisco and San Jose, which I think like says something pretty interesting about the heat map and signals. And that's kind of this band here of different signals that have been placed alongside these two highways. One of them is Route 84, the other is Highway 101. And basically, like I was looking at the map, and it kind of occurred to me that the placement of signals here like does make a ton of sense, right? This highway, these two roads between San Jose, Silicon Valley, and San Francisco are commuted by like millions of people on a daily basis, and there's a really high demand for location services in those places. But it's a form of location service demand that's not really defined by POI placement. Like there aren't really, you know, a ton of coffee shops that are lining the actual highway. People aren't really made a commute from one area here to, let's say, downtown San Francisco and vice versa. And so if you just were to say like, oh, we should kind of set up dynamic proof of location right where POIs are, you would basically miss out on this really important stretch of infrastructure between these two places. And so what the heat map and signals basically like showed us is that, yeah, well, obviously, you know, we can assume that San Jose and San Francisco might need DPOL, but the area in between them as well is a really interesting zone to look at, and maybe unexpected zone to look at in terms of figuring out dynamic proof of location placements. And so along the same lines of that, going back to this entire view of the U.S. So let's see like what's happening in Phoenix, Arizona, along the same lines of this like unexpected demand. And let's see if we zoom in here, should be able to see it. So also the other interesting thing about heat map feature is that if we weighted the visualization purely based off of the amount of tokens staked in the signaling contract, there would be a few areas that I think like disproportionately show a demand for dynamic proof of location. And like, yes, the signals staked behind, the foam tokens staked behind the signals do reveal an important amount of, I guess, like incentives and I guess like meaning behind how important the dynamic proof of location in that location is. But we also wanted to try to make it a little bit more democratic and say like, oh, well, if someone places a lot of individual points and they don't have as much foam token stake behind them, it's still important, I think, to visualize like what that means. And case in point, Phoenix, right, like wasn't necessarily on our radar as a place that would have a lot of signals in it or would have high demand for dynamic proof of location. But I think overall there's over 20 points around Phoenix, and right, whether it's from this zoomed out view or actually looking in within the city limits and seeing where each of these signals is individually placed, whether it's around the airport, around like other downtown areas, I think for, you know, from our perspective, it's a really interesting indicator of a demand that was maybe unexpected. And so these two trends, whether it was the individual like points of interest versus road thing that I talked about in the Bay Area, or whether it's the Phoenix point that I just made, I captured in a blog post that I pushed out a couple days ago, and we're testing out to see, you know, how people respond to blog posts on our discourse forum versus Medium. I think like this might be a more interesting experiment around people actually commenting and having conversations based off of the points made in the blog post. So if you're interested at all in this idea, go check out our blog, go read through the post, and let us know what you think. And we'd also be really curious to hear, you know, if there are any areas of signals or, you know, basically concentrations, point density on the heat map that was maybe unexpected for you that you saw and want to point out to us. I think we'd be really interested in seeing what that is. And so moving on, I wanted to kind of like take a little shift and talk about another interesting trend on the foam map that I noticed the other day. And so I don't know if you guys ever see the point of interest tweets that we tweet out, but a lot of those come from me kind of browsing the foam map and seeing what just interesting POIs exist around the globe. And one city that's popped up a few times, but I've never really like dived super deeply into the actual POIs until the other day is Bologna, Italy. And I think it's the work of one specific community member who responded to our forum post. I think his name is Antonio. I forget his last name, but basically this one cartographer has gone into Bologna, and you could tell they either live there or spent a lot of time there. I know there's a university in Bologna that's that's really old and popular. This person basically went in and registered POIs that represent these like very, I guess, like insider views of Bologna, whether it's through historical kind of aside that is very granular and specific but interesting, and maybe not as well known to the general public, or whether it's like a restaurant that this person really likes and has some kind of emotional connection to. Bologna basically is almost 100% consisted of these like very personal POIs. And so I was just kind of thinking about this trend of like, well, when you crowdsource a map, the first wave of points to be registered, it makes sense that they would be really personal. Like if you were in this cartographical community and you wanted to share basically like points of interest with other cartographers, it would make sense that yes, maybe like points that have really high like rates of access, like a Starbucks or something like that, it makes sense to share those, but also on a more personal note, things that I think are just kind of like on the top of your mind or mean a lot to you as well. It makes sense that you register those type of points. And so I just want to encourage everyone to like, go check out Bologna and read through some of these POIs. They're actually like really interesting. And I feel like I was in Bologna this summer and I didn't know like half the stuff that I learned about through the POIs registered on the phone map. So I encourage everyone to go check out that city. And also like, if you come across any of these similar types of points that have some kind of like personal significance, I made a thread about Bologna on the phone map under Discourse. And once again, like, please comment and let us know if you've seen this trend before, or if you have any POIs that come to mind that kind of embody this idea. And that's pretty much all I want to talk about. I'll hand it back to you, Arthur.
Thanks, Brian. I think, as Brian said, looking forward to finding more of your hidden points and directed towards the community, of course. And the next presentation is by Caleb, who many of you learned to know and love through our community. I'll give straight over to you, Caleb, but the presentation is basically on the leaderboard that's launching next week and Caleb's work on it. And without further ado, I think Caleb does a much better job at explaining it and its functionality than me.
Thank you, Arthur. It's really, really nice to be back on with you guys. So we've been working with the foam team on the foam map leaderboard for the past few weeks. And we've launched the beta version, and you can find that beta version on Discourse. But in working on the leaderboard, you know, what I've kind of come to understand is that the value that it's adding cartographers is there's kind of two paths to the value that it adds. So one is that it's a really good recognition of contributions to the map, and we can see who the top cartographers are, and we'll look at that in a second. But the other way, and what it's doing, is almost building a reputation system for cartographers. So if you see that maybe your point is challenged or something like that, and you want to dig a little bit deeper, or you're kind of on the fence about which way to vote in a challenge, you can actually look up the challenger and the original cartographer and stuff like that, and get a little bit more information about them. So with that said, in that introduction, I'll go ahead and share the leaderboards and take you through a small demo. So you can find the leaderboard on Discourse, and there's a link to it right here. And as you use the leaderboard, and if you find any issues or if you have any suggestions, the best place to put them is just in this thread. We've already received really amazing feedback. We found a few bugs and been able to fix a few bugs as a result of kind of the community members kind of coming together and PMing me or posting the feedback in this thread. And that's really been amazing. So moving into the leaderboard, by default, the leaderboard shows all-time stats. And by default, it shows the cartographer who has the most points on the map. So we can sort each column to kind of see which cartographers are ranked highest against each category. So the first category is points on the map. The next category is challenges initiated. The next category is challenges that the cartographer has voted on. And the final category is map rewards, or how many foam tokens the cartographer has won in challenges and votes on the map. And what's interesting looking at this is that the top account for map rewards has earned around $1,000 worth of foam tokens at today's prices. So he posted some of his tips on this discourse. But since I send the daily digest, I'll just say, kind of as a plug, that he said the strategy he's using is checking email every night and challenging any points that have been added but don't quite seem right. So I think that's really cool that somebody has kind of, a few people have found a way to really be able to curate the map and already derive fairly significant rewards out of it. But, you know, as I kind of sort and play with this table, what I start seeing is that, you know, broadly speaking, cartographers are specializing in one of two areas. So kind of either the cartographers that add a lot of points, but aren't making many challenges or aren't voting too often. And then on the other side, it's people who are challenging a lot and voting a lot, but not adding as many points. And it's relatively rare for a cartographer to have high rankings across all four categories. So I'm really curious to see if anyone really goes for it and tries to kind of win in each category over kind of a given month or all time even. So if we look at this month, what we can see and what we can highlight is that this cartographer here, 0x9bf, has added 19 points. And so he's added almost 25% of the total points on the map so far this month. And what we can do is filter for his activity by typing in the first few letters of his address here, and then look at his previous month's activity, or this account's previous month's activity, where it added 15 points. And if we look at the all-time behavior for this account, we see that it's added 34 points in total. So since February, this account has added 34 points, and it's just become really active, I would say, you know, this month and last month. And so we can start to get a feel for kind of recent activity on the map on an individual cartographer's level. And I think that that's really useful to start to see. So as you play around with this, if you find anything else interesting, I think it would be great to hear about it on Discourse or in some of the other channels for Foam. But really the whole point of releasing this beta has been to get feedback on bugs and missing features. And so as I said, fortunately, we had a few bugs fixed already, thanks to the community feedback. And Ryan has been floating the idea of 3-box profile integration, which I've actually already started working on. So if you're not familiar with 3-box profile integration, what this allows for is to build a little profile using your Ethereum address. And so just as an example, eStats has implemented this. And looking at an account on their Block Explorer, this account's name is Zapu. It has a link to this person's GitHub account, Twitter account, and website. And so it's a great way to kind of, you know, if you want to almost advertise yourself or as a top cartographer, it's kind of a way to get more fame out of the leaderboard. So we're planning on implementing that. It's being worked on. And if you want to have your profile ready as soon as the map goes live, you can go to the 3box website and 3box.io and set up your Ethereum address. It only takes a few minutes, and you can choose out a custom avatar and so on and so forth. We're also hoping to understand kind of what other information is helpful in making decisions using the TCR. So, you know, maybe like a list of all points that the user has added, or the results of every challenge, or something like that, that would help in terms of making decisions about challenges and votes as a cartographer. That'll really help us moving forward, figuring out kind of if there's more work to do on the leaderboard, or if there's work to do outside of the leaderboard to make the experience curating points and adding points a bit easier. So I really appreciate being able to kind of share this work on the leaderboard. It's really great to come back into the call, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Caleb, for your work. And we're really excited to launch this next week on its own subdomain and kind of going out of beta. And I also think the identity additions are really promising. I also think that although it's very hard to pull out any stats on how, if this is improving any of the point addition yet, we see that the interest this has generated already among the community and the amount of answers and the kind of discussion, it seems very promising. And all of this is kind of part of a larger incentive and strategy, which I will talk about specifically now. I'm going to screen share and go through some thoughts and some kind of experiments we've ran so far and the results of that, and talk about where we're going next. Okay, let's see here. Okay, amazing. So, can everyone see my screen? Okay, so I'm just going to presume that you can. So, to put this in context, when we talk about incentives and gamification on the foam map, what we're talking about is what are the ways that we can further incentivize people to add points to the foam map, but not only that, but also interact with the other functionalities such as challenging points on the foam map. And we can see, this is a bit older, but we can see that already there is not only, you can say that the proof of use performed a kind of incentive function, but there are also other incentives at play that push people or incentivize people to add points to the map. And what we're doing right now is thinking about what are the ways that we can further get more points on the map and get more people to participate more, and further people to participate, basically. And it's basically to break this down, and I've just released a discourse kind of post on this. This is kind of an overview of that, which is our thoughts behind our recent gamification initiatives. I want to frame this by dividing our kind of gamification efforts into two categories. And the first category is explicit gamification, which is games that also fulfill non-game purposes. And a classical example of an explicit gamification game is the McDonald's Monopoly, which of course is a game, but also gets people to McDonald's and get people to purchase McDonald's items, basically. So there's a game which has an extra function outside of the pure enjoyment of the people participating in. This is like often used in campaigns, and we've done two explicit ones so far. I'll go more into that. But there's also implicit gamification, which is how you change the design of a platform or a thing you interact with to further incentivize and to make the interaction with it more fun. And here are, for example, the badges within Foursquare, which is an example of implicit gamification. So on the explicit gamification side, we've done 2 experiments so far that I think many of you have participated in and hopefully enjoyed. They serve as both, of course, as a marketing tool, but they also serve as kind of a way for us to prove assumptions and to learn more about the motivations of the people interacting with the foam map, and also what are like the how can we drive people to contribute to the foam map more. So for the treasure hunt, if all of you remember, we ran this over the holiday season. We released 10 riddles. The answer was always a place, and people would place a point, and the first one that got the point right received a secret NFT that was done together with Block Cities. And and this game was basically based on 3 assumptions, and we wanted to see. So I'm going to go through these individually and see what was the answer to that. So the first assumption we wanted to validate was, does the foam map provide a good framework for spatial games? We had kind of been playing with the idea of games being built with a foam map, and wanted to try out a simple game and see if the kind of the existing POI edition framework provided a good way for basically designing a guess game around, or not a guess game, but a skill-based game, of course. So that worked well, and that really proved to us that also maybe this is a developer track that is really good to pursue initially, and I'll get to that later. But I think definitely this is the easiest yes. It worked well, people were really happy with it, and it was fun also on our side to design a game in the foam framework. And what's also worth mentioning here is that the game, the treasure hunt, was designed and implemented totally by the marketing team. So in theory, this could have been done by anyone, and didn't need the foam developer team to interact with the third party that develops this. Yeah, interesting point to point out. So then the next, did it get people to use the foam map? We wanted to see, is this a good way to get people to use the foam map? If we look at the data of unique point adders, we see that this is the proof of use ending, which was a huge incentive. And then we have these 2 spikes during, or not spikes, but like these 2 small stimulations going upward during the treasure hunt. What I think personally is that, well, I know personally that we saw a huge uptick in actual views during the foam, during the treasure hunt. There were a lot more visitors during the treasure hunt, but we failed to convert a lot of those visitors into users. And that is because the foam token, and this is a problem experienced by most dApps, if not all, that are currently building, let's say, public-facing blockchain products, is that to get to the foam token, you needed to go to through an exchange. And what we basically did was we engaged the existing community rather than onboarding a lot of people, because the friction of the onboarding process was still too large. And so next steps, then the question is, how can we onboard, how can we make the onboarding process easier as a kind of learning and next step of this? We're working on a decentralized exchange widget integration for 0x, which should be released next week or as part of the next release if everything goes well. There can be more work on mobile wallet compatibility. We've already done it already is compatible. So if you, for example, if you use a mobile wallet today and navigate to the foam map, it is at least somewhat usable. And one thing that might be worth exploring further is gamifying the actual onboarding process. You know, like a step-by-step where you get some kind of reward at the end or something like that. The second validation, the second assumption, I mean, was, do users add points based on a game like this? And they do, but not that many. So if we look at the results for the foam points added during this period, we see similar spikes, but these are a bit lower than the unique people that add points. And I think that is mainly based on the game mechanics. The game mechanics weren't optimized for points added per user. I think the game mechanics, since there was one guess, they got resolved kind of quick. Like after an hour of most of the riddles being posted, the result was already done. So for future campaigns or explicit gamification tests, we probably want to change up the game mechanics slightly to optimize more for points added. And here are two ideas, which would be winners are decided based on aggregate amount of points, or there would be many possible answers to a riddle. So people have to place many points and then they would get the answer right. So these are kind of the findings from the first test. And that kind of validated some of our core assumptions. And we wanted to test out some more stuff. And the next was a new lab campaign. The new lab campaign was done together with an event we did in New York at the New Lab, which was called the New York Blockchain Showcase. And here we basically had one NFT, and we would distribute that to everyone who added a point of interest within a certain area. And what we wanted to try were two assumptions. And the first one is, do non-unique NFTs also provide an incentive for adding points? Because the problem we saw with the treasure hunt was that the providing unique art was not going to really mean a scalable incentive model. So do, for example, do non-unique NFTs that are distributed to everyone that fulfills a certain barrier, but everyone gets the same, also provide an incentive. Because this is, of course, if we talk about things like badges, for example, which are non-unique NFTs, if we do NFT badges, then this is something important to measure. And we think, yes, it did. We had 63 additions in a short time frame, and we see that the area is quite populated here. Then we had another question, which is, do extrinsic campaigns produce high quality points? There is an argument that is also, so in some of the open source communities, there is an argument made against incentivizing other than like adding incentivization layers on top of open source data entries. Because the argument is that it produces, if people do not enter the data based on only the internal kind of motivations, that they believe in the cause, which I don't think is conflicting, but still, that they will provide somehow worse quality of data. So this was really easy to try out. We added a tag so we could track the individual points added during the campaign. Out of the 63 points, only 5 were faulty, or let's say the community agreed that 5 were faulty. And here in the picture, you see that 4 of those were actually New Lab duplicates, which probably is caused by some confusion around the rule set rather than the incentive model. And 1 was just called K, a single K. What's also interesting is that even and this is an argument I think is interesting, is that if external people build games on the foam map, even if they provide incentives that are that provide bad data entries into the foam map itself, we do have a verification model that catches these bad data entries and actually provides a value to the community. Because then, as Caleb showed, there is an economical value to, let's say, curating or gardening the map. Okay, so those are 2 assumptions. Those are kind of the results of the test we've done so far. And now next I want to focus on implicit gamification, which was a second category, which are gamification elements that are more baked into the design. And our first kind of bigger rollout on that is the leaderboard that Caleb has worked on. That is clearly like an implicit, the design itself promotes higher interactions based on integrating gamification elements. We want to, of course, expand this further, and the identity integration through 3box is the first step of that. Other things would be badges, other ways to represent reputation. We're very interested in your views on this. What would be cool to display on your page, and more. And we see this as a first of potentially other ways to incentivize actions on the phone map. I hope I've given a somewhat overview over our gamification efforts. Unfortunately, we don't have any findings on the leaderboard yet. Hopefully in a few weeks at another community call, we can see if or not the leaderboard has impacted the addition of points on the phone map or had any other consequences. But for us, the next steps are basically, right now with these learnings, is doing more thesis validations through tests. Until now, many of these processes haven't been automated, and if we want to do this at scale, we have to write more smart contracts and do more automation of it, which we have to test. I also think that there is stuff to be done on the coordination layer. Twitter and kind of our Telegram and our Discourse are great tools, but are there better ways to coordinate a crowd, a community around these campaigns? We also are currently looking at maybe in May running a larger campaign, which kind of combines many of these features we've talked through in a larger campaign that potentially is public facing. But as we've seen, there's some friction points of like onboarding that we need to solve before then. And then maybe most importantly, this is kind of also a way of proving or starting to have conversations around what kind of games and can be built on the phone map with real value using NFTs or other, who knows really. But we would like to have those conversations and are looking at formalizing stuff like a grant or a fund for this as well. So if you have any ideas that would be great for a game using the phone map, please get in touch. And yeah, there's a few threads on our Discourse. There's also one on different games that could be built. Daryl, if you can link that, that would be great to have your view on. And that's basically all for my part regarding gamification. What I also recommend people to do is check out the developer portal if you want to build something. Other than that, that's the end of my presentation. Okay. So for the rest of the call, did any more questions go in?
I don't think so.
I muted myself. I think that's the end of the call. Thank you everyone for joining. If you have more questions, please ask on our Discourse. There's been links added to the individual channels. Thank you, Caleb, as always, for joining, and thank you for joining us from ECC in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice. Thanks for taking time.
Thanks.
Otherwise, there will be a recording of this up soon. Yeah, have a great day, evening, night, depending on where you are. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
See you guys.